Good evening to all of you and to all the colleagues and guests. I would like you to welcome you to all to today's colloquium of the German Lost Art Foundation. I have the honor to welcome you for the first time in my function as a research advisor of the Department for Cultural Property Losses in Europe in the 20th century, as I only took up the position in April. And before I come to today's lecture, I would like to highlight the relaunch of the German Lost Art Foundation's website, and we are very happy that it's finally done, and we are looking forward to your feedback. Also, I would like to draw your attention to the still relatively new blog and the newsletter for which you can sign up. But that's enough of self-promotion, and today we are happy to welcome Pascale Bernheim, and she will talk about confiscations of musicalia and musical instruments in her lecture titled A New Field of Investigation, the Spoliation Orchestrated by the so-called Third Reich of Musical Instruments, Scores, and Manuscripts during 1939 and 1945. In the context of the Nazi persecution-related confiscation of cultural property, musical instruments and musicalia have so far played a rather marginal role in research. Although there have been projects within the scope of our funding that have sometimes dealt with musicalia or instruments in individual cases, there have only been few projects, such as those at the universities of Cologne or Leipzig, that have been devoted exclusively to this topic. However, the fact that this field of research is of greater interest internationally and interdisciplinarily is shown by the founding of a working group initiated by Pascale Bernheim and Elisabeth Furtwängler only last Tuesday in the context of the annual meeting of the German Arbeitskreis Provenienzforschung. And here today among the participants, I can see some of the founding members. Pascale Bernheim has been working in the cultural sector for years, and in 2016 she decided to devote herself exclusively to the search for looted musical assets, and in 2017 she set up Musique et Spoliation, an association based in Paris, France. Before I give the floor to Pascale, I would like to make a few preliminary remarks and remind you of the procedure. For your information, this talk will be recorded and can be found later on our YouTube channel. I would now kindly ask you to turn off your cameras and microphones to avoid any jamming. Also, you're welcome to ask questions or make comments after the presentation, by a show of hands or by chat, but please use both functions only after the presentation. Thank you very much. And now, Pascale, it's your turn. Pascale, we can't hear you. I think you're still muted. Now you're on.
Thank you. And okay. Can you see the screen? Can you see the screen now? Yes. As a founding member of Musique et Spoliation, a recently founded French association.
We can't see the screen, Pascale.
Ah, you can't see the screen?
No.
Yes, you can. Can you? Oops. Can you see the screen? No. Okay. Partager. Okay. Écran. Yes, partager. And here it is. And here it is. Okay. So you can see.
Yes, we can see in presentation mode. Perfect.
And you can hear. Okay,
yes.
So I start. So I would like to thank you, Stephanie, and the DITSETCA for asking me to speak today. On July 22nd of this year, a new law came into force in France, governing the restitution of looted cultural property. This law was passed with a view to speeding the process of restoring property held in public collections looted in France or elsewhere as a result of anti-Semitic policies during the period January 30th, 1933 to May 8th, 1945 to its rightful owners. As of now, any property held in public collections since World War II is liable for restitution. Previously, only such property designated as MNR was available for restitution. The law was passed unanimously in France's Assemblée nationale. It represents a huge step forward. My fellow countrymen may justly be proud. I have come here today to discuss the work of an association whose activity is entirely aligned with the process of research, reparation, and heritage which this new law is intended to encourage. As a child, I often leafed through the pages of a book called Sight and Insight by an American photographer named Philip Halsman. This was a collection of portraits of anonymous 20th century faces. The print quality was such that I could feel the texture of Laurence Olivier's cheek or pinch Churchill's, not to mention Grace Kelly's platinum helmet. I was especially taken with the features of Arthur Rubinstein's face. The innate elegance of the broken collar he wore when performing stood in contrast to the way he tugged his hair to underline a monkey grin. I just loved that picture. I also found the photograph of Wanda Landowska irresistible, left thumb pressed deeply into the bottom key of a harpsichord, right hand suspended midair, fingers spread, ready to pounce on the upper keyboard as a cat stood carelessly by on a closed music stand. A set of shiny pedals just showed in the shadows beneath her heavy velvet dress. Years later, when I was able to consult Wanda Landowska and Arthur Rubinstein's files in the French Service Français de Récupération Artistique archives, it was like meeting old friends. My interest in the looting of artworks had been stimulated by Le Musée Disparu, a book by Hector Feliciano, but I was far from thinking that musicians had been plundered too. This was in 2016. I scoured the literature. Plenty of people had written about music under the Nazis, but there was nothing specifically about the looting of instruments and musical scores. No one seemed interested, apart from very few people like Carla, who's here today. And except for this very detailed book, Sonderstabmusik, by a Dutch musicologist named Willem de Vries, published in 1996, then in German in 1998. One of the very first tasks we set ourselves as an association was to make a French translation available in 2019. So, Musique et Spoliation was established because there seemed so little interest in the area. I decided we ought to focus on the specific issue of identifying instruments and documents that had vanished during World War II. Wanda Landowska's own collection offered the perfect case in point because it illustrates the vast scope of the Sonderstabmusik activities. This was a specific commando entrusted with the job of ensuring that Jewish musicians were rooted out of musical circles in occupied territories. It was also charged with confiscating, in plain English, stealing, everything they might possess, including instruments, scores, documents, and rare books. Wanda Landowska was born a Catholic in Warsaw in 1879 into a family of converted Jews. She became one of the leading musicians of her age until her death in the United States at the age of 80 in 1959. Having studied composition in Germany, then in Paris, she toured Europe for the first time at the age of 24, going as far as Russia. She was passionate about the harpsichord and was one of the first people ever to record the works of Bach on that instrument. As no available harpsichords were powerful enough for major concert halls, she commissioned Pleyel to make her an instrument which was inaugurated at the Bach Festival in Breslau in 1912 to huge acclaim. The model was manufactured until 1969. In 1904, the Musikhochschule in Berlin set up the first ever harpsichord professorship. Then in Paris, where she moved after the First World War, she taught at the Sorbonne and the École Normale. She taught often, including from 1923 onwards in America. Her first American tour was conducted by Leopold Stokowski, and she settled in America when the Nazis forced her out of France. Wanda Landowska was passionate about music, literature, and organology. She amassed a major collection of ancient instruments and a library of more than 10,000 volumes open to students and music lovers from all over the world who came to attend her musical interpretation courses and also the concerts she organized at her home in Saint-Leu-la-Forêt, outside Paris, where she had a private auditorium built. Wanda Landowska inspired many composers, including Manuel de Falla, who dedicated his concerto for harpsichord and 5 solo instruments to her, as did Francis Poulenc with his Concert Champêtre. When the Nazis came to power, she made an ideal target. Although she was by now a French citizen and a Catholic, her ancestors had been, as we have said, converted Polish Jews. The looting of work of arts had started as early as 1933 with the confiscation of Jewish private collections, but the process soon spread right across Europe as more and more territories were occupied. In order to extend the plundering of artworks, German authorities developed the Kunstschutz concept, according to which all heritage, not just Jewish-owned property, must be protected in wartime. In reality, looted artworks were intended to fuel the Reich's major cultural projects. Until the end, private and public collections were systematically plundered. But the Einsatzstab's Reichsleiter Rosenberg, ERR, was also designed to supply Hitler and Goering's private collection. A subsection covering musical property was established, the Amt Musik, with Herbert Göring appointed director. This was the person charged with ensuring that Jews no longer took part in musical life throughout the Reich and its occupied territories. In 1940, Göring published a work co-authored with Theophil Stengel entitled Lexikon der Juden in der Musik to accompany the introduction of anti-Jewish measures. When the ERR came to Paris in 1940, the music section changed its name to Sonderstabmusik. Although this was based in France, its activities covered Belgium and Holland too. What were its tasks? To confiscate musical material that was abandoned, herrenlos, throughout the occupied territories of Western Europe, to identify any German musical scores or other musical documentation seized in such territories, to pack and return any such material property to Germany, The Sonderstabmusik had a staff of up to 8 people. These included the German musicologist Wolfgang Goethischer and the Alsatian instrument maker Peter Vogelweit, who was responsible for buying and packing instruments. More on Vogelweit later. But first, back to Wanda. As the Germans were approaching Paris in March 1940, Wanda Landowska was finishing recording Scarlatti sonatas. It was not an easy moment. In the little D major sonata, one of 8 recorded that day, the sound of bombing is clearly audible. And I would like now to make you hear a first extract of Wanda Landowska. She speaks and she explains the circumstances of the recording. And then in the second extract, if the sound of your computer is good, you might be able to hear a very muffled sound, which is a sound of bombing, actually. So this is the first extract.
While I was playing one of them, a near-red alarm sounded overhead, soon to be followed by anti-aircraft guns firing at enemy planes. But this dramatic atmosphere inspired me to go on.
And now music. I have a terrible computer with an awful sound, but I could hear it. I hope you did. On June 10th, 1940, ahead of the armistice, Wanda Landowska and her secretary Denise Restou escaped Paris. The sculptor Aristide Maillol offered them safe harbor at his home in Banyuls, near the Catalan border. Meanwhile, in the summer of 1940, a raft of anti-Jewish bylaws was opening the way for the Sonderstabmusik to begin its activities. Around September 20th, Herbert Guéric appeared in Saint-Leu-la-Forêt, accompanied by about 15 handlers. This operation had clearly required some planning. Dismantling and packing Landowska's instrument collection took these men about 10 days. On September 29th, 54 crates were ready for dispatch to the Louvre, where they were consigned by Rose Valland before being stored for onward transport to Germany. In the autumn of 1940, Denise Restou returned to the occupied zone with a view to retrieving Landowska's property. She visited Saint-Leu and saw that entry into Landowska's home was officially forbidden. She then wrote an official request that the instruments and paper be returned, which was not transmitted by the French authorities onto the Germans until December 5th, by which time it was too late. The crates containing Landowska's belongings had already been sent to Berlin. Scores and other musical works it subsequently emerged had been sent to Schloss Langenau in Hirschberg, whence they probably ended up in the Soviet Union. The instruments went to Reichenhaslach Monastery outside Munich. The scale of this operation and the reaction it provoked meant the looting of Wanda Landowska's property has left an unusually visible trail. Wanda and Denise sailed from Lisbon to America, reaching New York on December 7th, 1941, the day of Pearl Harbor. Wanda never returned to France. In the post-war period, though, Denise's files and her various attempts at retrieving the property enabled the identification of Wanda Landowska's instruments by means of so-called property cards. These cards were drawn up by the Allies at a collection point where ERR held goods were sent from September 45 on. They indicate that Vanda's instruments were shifted from Bavaria to Paris in July 1946. They were returned to Landowska and sold by her heirs after her demise. They now reside in various museums and private collections throughout France, Belgium, the United States, and South Africa. A part, but only a part, of her impressive book and manuscript collection was discovered. The rest is probably in the former Soviet Union, and some instruments are yet to be found, or perhaps they just no longer exist. The Landowska files constitute an exemplary case, both in terms of the scale of the operation and in terms of restitution. A considerable correspondence exists with Willem de Vries, notably, and the latter's extensive research has enabled the whole tragic tale to be told. Other musicians and personalities have not been so lucky. I mean, others did not have their Denise. Darius Milhaud, among others, Arno Pollesch, Fernand Alphen's widows, the cellist Gregor Petigorski, the conductor Felix Hesse, the dancer Jeanne Schall, and also a conductor, and the Bureau de Concert de Valmalette, a well-known concert agentur. How many musicians, enlightened amateurs, collectors, and professionals were plundered by the Sonderstabmusik in all? And from 92 onwards, when the looting of private property was extended to cover all private belongings, how many apartments were searched by the ERR's mobile action? We don't know, actually. They took anything and everything, including light bulbs. Pianos were transported into prisoner of war camps within the city limits, where they were identified by serial number, often dismantled, sometimes deliberately damaged, then discreetly stored in the basement floor of the Paris Palais de Tokyo, now the Museum of Contemporary Art. The very few statistics we have are astonishing, offering a testimony to the importance of music in ordinary families' lives. The Matteli report, published in 1997, gives a figure of 69,619 for the number of households plundered in France. Today, this figure is considered low. What we do know is that in Paris alone, some 39 apartments were searched and 8,000 pianos removed, or one piano in every 5 apartments. People who had neither space nor money to buy a piano often owned violin, clarinet, and other instruments. Seized property was transported to Germany to compensate German families whose home had been destroyed in massive bombings campaigns. The finest instruments were sent to the Ministry of Propaganda for use by star Aryan performers. Party officials and officers pilfered exceptional property for private use. By the end of the war, though, there were still more than 2,000 pianos at the Palais de Tokyo ready for transport. Well-known shots of rows of pianos stored on their sides in that basement should not obscure the scale of mobile action losses, nor the fact that many instruments were sold or exchanged in order to finance a family's escape, or sometimes just for food. And then there were instruments entrusted into care that simply never reappeared. Reparations organized by the Allies in the post-war period will never allow us to know just how many instruments vanished, let alone enable us to trace them. Looted instruments were soon forgotten. They were not worth as much as a painting. They were harder to trace and to identify. Léon Blum, a well-known French Jewish politician, twice prime minister, was one of the few to get his piano back during identification sessions arranged at the Palais de Tokyo. Most musicians left in a hurry. They had neither photographs nor receipts, still less certificates of value to prove ownership. And what about instruments hurriedly stashed in a hiding place or left in someone's care when the owner was deported to a death camp never to return? Where are the instruments that were played in concentration camps? As you all must know, the Répertoire des biens spoliés was published between 1947 and 1949 by the Bureau Central des Restitutions. It contains some 6,000 pages worth of evidence provided by victims taken from German bureaucratic archives and other sources, such as Rose Valland's notes taken as property passed through the Louvre. Goods are classified according to type. But the 1,567 pianos and the 728 instruments listed seem paltry in comparison with the figures that I have given above. This is because the issue of looted instruments and the associated question as to how musical instruments were transported during the war has barely been broached. The sources are few and far between. Those that exist have yet to be discovered. Musique et Spoliation has been set up to fill a gap. We believe we have a duty to victims and to their families. The goal, as far as we are concerned, is to make sure that individual stories are told and placed within the broader historical context. This, more than restitution, it seems to us, is what matters. Our association aims to collect remaining witness accounts, whether direct or indirect, of a painful area. Each tale forms a part of a giant puzzle, and we hope to be able to gather as much pieces together as possible and in due course. It is our purpose, too, to establish and cross-reference such indices and such databases as exist, to dig into archives and to raise awareness in scientific and musical circles, to support publication and, where relevant, to help new restitution and provenance procedures. With this in mind, Musique et Spoliation has made its business to identify, support, and bring relevant parties together, whether they be musicians, historians, merchants, collectors, private or public. Knowing your instrument's provenance is a right and a duty. It requires a wide range of skills: musicological, organological, historical, scientific, and legal. To this end, together with Sciences Po Paris and the University of Manchester, Musique et Spoliation organized the very first looted music study day in Paris in January 2020, just before lockdown. Then, in 2022, the two colloquia held successively in Brienz, Switzerland, and at Paris, Musée de la Musique. Looted instruments traveled great distances and often ended up in the Third Reich. Germany seems an obvious place to go, and this is why, thanks to Elisabeth Furtwängler, a video conference was arranged last June to introduce our work to a German audience, including many people here today, not just academics, but people from all walks of life, of life, including museums, universities, orchestras, public institutions, and of course, independent researchers. Our video conference showed that there is some way to go on the consciousness raising front in Germany, where public and private archives have yet to be explored from our perspective. Public and private instrument collection, instrument makers of all kinds, auction houses, orchestras, universities, and music academies must all be approached. And, as was noted back then, identifying musical instruments and or other musical documentation demands specific musicological and organological skills often yet to be found. An anonymous view was reached that an overall research method must to be defined, and this was part of our discussion at last week's Arbeitskreis Provenienzforschung annual meeting. I should add that, with support from the Sophie Rochard Foundation, we were able to travel to Poland to inquire into the circumstances under which the Warsaw Museum Stradivarius disappeared in 1944. We are also supporting a major research initiative in Łódź into instruments confiscated from the ghetto in 1942. State archival sources, as well as those of the Philharmonic Orchestra, music school, and the theater, will be combed in order to discover what happened to the instruments and honor the memory of those who played them before they were slaughtered. And I can't tell you how astonished I was to find this wall painting in the streets of Łódź. In France, the discovery of an Alsatian instrument broker's notebook raised awareness of Alsace as a strategic hub where France, Germany, and Switzerland meet. The broker in question was extremely active during the war years. An investigation has now begun into activities of Pierre Vogelweit, mentioned earlier. Vogelweit was employed by the Sonderstab Musik to prepare instruments, then arrange their transport to Germany. He became temporary director of Wolf, the most important music score in Strasbourg, when the business Jewish owners had to flee. But Pierre Vogelweit's real claim to fame, among experts at least, is that he gave a 1711 Stradivarius violin his name in 1943. The Vogelweit ex Tartini violin, as it is known. His position at the time and his role at the Sonderstab Musik meant that searching questions need to be asked on the circumstances in which the instrument was acquired. Our association is starting a fundraising campaign to fund doctoral students throughout Europe interested in pursuing research into these and similar areas of interest. Preserving heritage seems all the more important today. Museum collections are struggling with issues of provenance. Reports from conflict zones further contribute to our sense that protecting cultural goods and ensuring that the transparency of their histories is becoming a vital issue. Musical instrument purchases must be subject to the same controls as exist in other sectors of the art market. And this, of course, is not the least of the tasks we have made our own. New laws now exist to govern trade in cultural goods. Our association is determined to help ensure that all transactions are transparent. Musical instruments, like other cultural goods, should benefit from new technologies and contemporary procedures that can help guarantee provenance and history, however unsettled that history may be. Unless this is achieved, future transaction will not be secure and new tragedies will arise. Thank you very much.